Ladies and gentlemen, my name's Paul, and in this RedGamingTech.com video, we're going to be discussing as well as analysing tech news which as usual has popped up in the past 24 or so hours. And I hope you're all having an amazing day. I'd like to kick this video off with news of VanGogh, which is an upcoming APU from AMD, as well as Navi 21 and a couple of derivatives thereof. And these discoveries were found by Nemes on Twitter. He actually tagged me in this, so thank you very much to him, and full credit to him for digging through the Adrenaline 2020 drivers. And you can see the relevant entries because he's helpfully circled them here in green. But for one, we can see that VanGogh has the string GFX 1032, whereas Navi 21 is GFX 1030. GFX 10, of course, is a reference to Navi, so this does almost certainly mean that VanGogh is using an RDNA-based GPU. Unfortunately, what VanGogh actually is intended for is mysterious at best. As I mentioned a moment ago, it is an APU, although there is a lot of confusion whether it's for, let's say, an upcoming Apple product, like, for example, a laptop, whether it's for a Microsoft product, obviously they're pushing Surface quite heavily right now, or whether it's just a generic APU which anyone can buy is, well, unfortunately too difficult to ascertain right now. There's just not enough information. Either way, I'm all for a decent APU for the desktops. I'm actually quite a fan of the idea of having a plethora of products, which is an all-in-one solution which puts out a decent amount of gaming grunt, plus as well generic workhorse as well. Of course, at the moment there are some issues with APUs, not least of which is bandwidth constraints. Obviously, if you're using just DDR4 memory, it's hard to feed a lot of CUs with limited bandwidth, which of course could certainly change in the future when we see the shift to DDR5. Either way, VanGogh is going to be a fascinating product, I think, to keep an eye on. And from AMD, I'd like to shift the attention of this video to a couple of Intel-related topics, the first of which is that Intel have purchased the AI chip firm known as Habana Labs. This is for a rather impressive sum of cash, $2 billion US. According to David Danham, hopefully I've pronounced that correctly, who is the CEO of the aforementioned company, we have been fortunate to get to know and collaborate with Intel given the investment in Habana, and we're thrilled to officially be joining the team. Intel has created a world-class AI team and capability, and we're excited to partner with Intel to accelerate and scale our business. Together, we can deliver our customers more AI innovation faster. So, the purchase of this company actually is very much in line with what we're seeing Intel do as a company. For a start, Habana Labs claims its particular solutions offer about a 4 times uplift in pure throughput compared to a dedicated GPU solution. Furthermore, Intel themselves have been investing heavily in AI right now, and indeed their own revenue for AI-related products has also increased substantially over the past 12-24 months. Indeed, 20% increased year over year for 2019 alone. That gives you some indicator of what Intel themselves are thinking. Plus, naturally, we've seen various other announcements from Intel, not least of which includes the Ponte Vecchio GPUs and the HPC elements from that, and it's clear that Intel are not wanting to just focus on being a CPU company which makes x86 products anymore. They are clearly in the midst of a transition to fight off companies such as Nvidia in the data center. This is something that we could certainly discuss a lot deeper, but Intel, in terms of the x86 space, are getting their butts kicked right now by AMD, particularly when it comes to products like the Ryzen series. There are some arguments to be made with some usage scenarios when it comes to, let's say, server HPC, particularly if there's heavy AVX work, but if you're building a streaming system or a pure gaming system or general workhorse or whatever, AMD have a product for you in just about every segment, whether it's the 3600, which is a ridiculously decent gaming CPU given the $200 price, or the rather ridiculous performance of the 3950X. Plus as well, if you look at the HEDT segment, Threadripper just basically stomps anything Intel have to offer, particularly if you are willing to pay the extra cash. Obviously, the X299 platform / the Intel 10th generation is a lot cheaper, but sometimes price is not the issue. You just need the performance, in which case, as I just mentioned, AMD have you covered. But Intel themselves are definitely wanting to transform themselves into much more than just a CPU company. And I think it's going to be something that's going to take them a long time to achieve, to the degree that most likely that they're happy with. It's going to be interesting, though, what happens in the next couple of years, as obviously Intel, AMD and Nvidia are all really rushing towards the HPC space. Plus, of course, the rise of various ASICs, ARM processors and so on. I think it's fair to say that the industry is going to be very different in, let's say, 2 to 3 years' time, let alone 5 or 10 years' time. So I'd like to also circle back to a news story which Amy covered yesterday, and this concerns an engineering sample processor which was discovered on the Systoff Sandra benchmarking database. And this is for a 6-core, 12-thread CPU. And if you missed it, the thing which is mysterious about this is each of the CPU cores naturally has its own level 2 cache, whereas the cache of other CPUs in Intel's lineup is typically like 256K, 512K, whatever. This is considerably larger, it's 1.25 megabytes. And of course also we have a 9 megabyte level 3 cache, which is not particularly out of the ordinary at all. Looking over the entry itself, there's nothing which tells you this is a particular architecture. Obviously, it's ambiguous for a reason, and it's also an engineering sample. And the fact that it's running on a server board makes it even more difficult to ascertain what this product is. Anyway, to cut a long story short, before the video was recorded, Amy actually asked my opinion on what this particular CPU was. Unfortunately, I was super duper distracted yesterday because I was actually in the middle of writing a rather lengthy analysis of Xbox Series X versus PlayStation 5, so I didn't actually look over the result that well, to be totally honest with you. And so a couple of you actually wrote to me in private and said, hey, is it potentially Willow Cove? And yeah, it probably is. So I hold my hands up. I kind of made an oopsie on that one. Most likely, this is a good indicator that we are looking at a backport of Willow Cove, aka Tiger Lake, onto the 14nm process. It's certainly not 100%, honestly. At the end of the day, we're kind of making assumptions based upon what we know about Willow Cove / Tiger Lake. And we also aren't 100% certain that at this point we will be seeing such early engineering samples. I would, however, point you to an article which I released just over a year ago now on this, and it concerns what Intel are thinking internally when the Ryzen 3000 series was yet to be announced. So basically, I leaked a lot of the platform details for Ryzen 3000, including the fact that the core count would be increasing, PCIe support, PCIe 4 support, and so on and so on. I'm going to read out this little quote verbatim. From his knowledge, he being my source, Intel isn't able to respond correctly. Oh yeah, my source also confirmed Comet Lake S exists too, and it would be a 10-core processor. He knows a lot less about the 10-core CPU from Intel, only that the company is definitely said to be worried about how to respond to AMD, and AMD is apparently content to play the core count game for right now with the Ryzen 3000 series. It makes sense for marketing and pushing the strength of their Infinity Fabric technology and the 7nm process. Let's just be honest, if back then Intel knew that AMD had a very compelling product roadmap, let's just say that they probably were already in the middle of thinking to themselves, how can we backport an architecture? How can we step out in front of this? And so I wouldn't be surprised if Rocket Lake engineering samples are kind of in the wild, or at least not too far from now. In the final piece of news for today, I'd like to discuss with you what Sony's Executive VP of Hardware Engineering, Masayasu Ito, has said. in regards to the PlayStation 5's life cycle, the PlayStation 5 Pro, and finally the PlayStation 6. I'm going to read this quote verbatim. Then we cannot fully catch up with the rapid development of technology. Therefore, our thinking is that as far as platform is concerned for the PS5, it's a cycle of maybe 6-7 years. But doing that, a platform cycle, we should be able to change the hardware itself and try to incorporate advancements in technology. That was the thinking behind it, and the test case for that thinking was the PS4 Pro that launched in the midway of the PS4 launch cycle, end quote. Sony don't specifically state that the PlayStation 5 Pro is on the way or anything, but it certainly seems like it if you read between the lines here. It's basically said that the PS5 is going to last, let's say, 6 years. Obviously, it's launching in 2020, late 2020, which means that by late 2026/early 2027, the PlayStation 6 should come out. Sony have actually registered PlayStation trademarks, I believe, up until PlayStation 10. Although whether we're going to actually have hardware which we're going to be able to purchase, or whether it's all going to be streaming at that point, which we could presume is going to be like 2040, 2045 or something like that. Goodness knows. But anyway, it most likely means that Sony are planning to launch a updated console, which is probably going to be in roughly 2023, which would tie in rather nicely with what they did with the PS4 Pro. Now, rather interestingly, a couple of months ago, there were reports that Sony were planning to launch a PlayStation 5 Pro simultaneously to the base PS5 system. But this looks like almost certainly it isn't the case, and Sony are only going to launch the base model PS5. Microsoft, though, seems to be approaching things rather differently. There were a lot of reports that Microsoft had killed Lockhart, which meant that there would be no lower performance SKU and all development resources were going into Anaconda, which we can now presume is Xbox Series X. However, now multiple reports have said that this isn't the case. Eurogamer, we've also seen Windows Central, plus also Jason Schreier over at Kotaku, plus a couple of other sources have all said that, yup, there is indeed lower performance SKU on the way for Microsoft. Indeed, even if you look at the name Xbox Series X, the name insinuates, with the name Series as well as X, that there are multiple different SKUs in the lineup. Because, honestly, the name Xbox Series X is kind of confusing. I have to say that Microsoft's naming schemes are always a bit weird. Like Xbox 360, I guess it kind of rolls off the tongue, but I don't particularly like it. Xbox One, I kind of understand what they were doing with it. It was an all-in-one device. That was the theory behind the name, which would provide entertainment for your living room, but it was also kind of confusing and a right pain in the butt if you're trying to do a Google for the original console, by the way. But yeah, Xbox Series X is a bit messy. As a name anyway, at least I think. But I think it makes sense if you consider the fact that there will be multiple systems in the lineup. I personally believe that Microsoft will try to make the lower end SKU around the $150-$200 mark, but it's going to be fascinating to see what Sony charge for the PlayStation 5 and also what the Xbox Series X ends up costing as well. With all of that said, hopefully you have enjoyed the video. Normal stuff if you did. Like, share, comment and subscribe. And I'll see you soon. Take care of yourselves. Bye for now.